ATS-01 standard is a set of rules which helps you to build much better lists, to show the lists in a more professional way to your users. I assume that the person who's watching this video is a developer, but if you are a project manager or any other kind of role, you still might be watching this and expect these kind of changes to be available in the product you're building. So these set of rules are built over time because I was seeing so many softwares, so many apps that they're just overwhelming users, and instead of giving people kind of a feeling that they can trust the software, they find themselves very lost inside it. And by applying these rules, these like 8, 9 rules, you will have kind of a feeling that your product is a finished professional product. And it's very important for many software houses, developers, and the product owners in the company that owns the product to have very polished product, because if they can keep the customers happy inside and then continue the same practices on the next product. So now let's go and take a look at the rules, and we will discuss furthermore. You can find the ATS-01 standard for React Native list-based projects under the pixelplux.com engineering, and then if you search for this topic, you will reach to a screen like this. On the top of the screen, there is a set of rules that we need to comply with in order to kind of say we applied this standard inside. The first rule is that it needs to be in React Native. So the first rule indicates that if you're writing the software in any other frameworks, like Android, iOS, does not matter that much, right? This rule is just not applying. That's not comply with the standard by definition. The component which this rule is being applied to, imagine this ATS-01 is not only about the whole project, it's about the lists in the app. So it says that if in screen, which is list-based, for example, list of purchases or list of users, then if it's not built by a virtualized list, like FlatList or section list in React Native, then it does not comply with this rule. We might be using scroll view, for example, in order to scroll the content, but it should not be used for things, for example, like blog posts, items which are coming from a remote server. It is supposed to be scrolling the layout of the software, not the content which is dynamically generated. Basically, you should not put a scroll view and items.map and each item inside it. You should just not do such thing. Another rule is error handling for first fetch strategy. So it happens a lot of times that you open a software, you open an app or even web page, and you're waiting until the content just pops in. Just some moment comes that you see everything, and before that there was nothing. The rule emphasizes that you need to have very, very good first fetch failure strategy. It means that if content getting from a remote server is failed, it's going to show the user a message and a way to refetch the information. So just you're waiting for the content, it shows the skeleton in the next rules we'll discuss. And if it failed due to any reason, just gonna show a message to the user that it failed due to this specific reason and need to fix that somehow. Error handling when a set of data is presented to the user. So this is interesting. This is very similar to the previous rule, but you need to remember for that sometimes the content is there. For example, you have the list of users, but now you want to filter it. So you added an option to filter the content, and the user taps on the filter menu and just shows up and then says, I want the users who were online yesterday. So now when you apply such rule, there is no user as such, or just the server fails. So you need to keep the content, which existing content from previous fetch, and then show this criteria you asked or whatever this request is has been failed. So this is when you have the content, there is a failure strategy. Empty list strategy. Empty list strategy is more about if a list is empty and we just tell the user there is no content on the remove server. Imagine there are no purchases for a user and then user goes inside it and sees, oh, it's empty. There's no message that you don't have any purchases yet. So they will think, okay, we purchased something like 10 minutes ago. What happened? Like it didn't went through at all, or we need to fix something. And it's very confusing. You need to tell if there are no records very clearly. There are no records, not just we didn't find anything, or giving the user a notion that there was an error, something like that in between. Pagination is something very common on the web, but now available to the mobile as well. So it says that any list you have, FlatList, whatever it is, it should be responsive and implemented methods to handle the responses. Skeleton loader. Skeleton loader is those kind of funky animated placeholders. When the content is loading, user sees them. It gives them kind of a notion how the layout of the content will be. Based on ATS 01, you need to implement that, and those placeholders necessarily should be very similar to the actual content. And this gives the user a feeling that they're waiting to some content to pop up. And then also, like, if they keep the amount of area, surface area that the real component will be using, then it just gives a better charming moment to the eyes. How are we going to implement that in a very good way, and showing some examples of it being implemented very bad will be soon in the next chapters or videos, basically. And but for this purpose, just remember you need to have those kind of skeletons implemented. Taking too long indication is for a moment that user is waiting for the content to load, but it's just taking forever. So you don't want a situation that user gets stuck because of slow network or failed network. All right, you want to have that kind of a reliability of user getting out of any dead ends. So in order to do that, you need to have an implementation which counts how many seconds from the request is gone. And then if it's, for example, more than 10 seconds, it's gonna pop down something, show this is taking too long. If you want, you can cancel. So if the user cancels, you can just like aborts. If the pull to refresh happens, then the previous request is aborted. And basically there is always a next action. You're not going to be stuck somewhere because of bad response or backend failure. Timeout and retry mechanism, basically they're telling the very similar stories, but it just trying to give you the idea that you need to have an option for the user to retry that request. For example, retrying to get the list of users, which is usually done by pull to refresh action, or you can add an extra button for that to refetch or something like that if it's not the main action of the list, which has been failed. For example, you posted something and it's closed, and then you just give the user the option to retry. That's a little of a different deal than when you're loading the list. So request cancellation on leaving the screen. You see a lot of times when you're changing tabs, when you're changing screens, the app feels a bit slower than it was staying on the same page. This is because many subscriptions like HTTP requests or Bluetooth scans, so many things that you gather the content, they have a process, right? And for a few seconds, and if the user is just living in the middle, that process is still kept worked on the content comes and it tries to put it on the UI and then just finds UI does not exist anymore, you need to have a strategy to cancel all subscriptions on a list, basically. So if you are leaving that list and you have very good cancellation mechanism implemented, then you do comply with these rules. Now we discussed about the rules, the theory, but we need to go into the code and see that in practice, how we can implement a list and comply with all of these good things we discussed about. After a quick break, we will continue on the coding side. See you in a bit.